Asterix and the Black Gold. The year was 50 BC, and Gaul, the country we now call France, was entirely occupied by the Roman army. Entirely? Well, not quite entirely. One small village in Armorica, the part of France we now call Brittany, was still holding out. The great Roman leader, Julius Caesar, was furious. He'd given orders for several fortified camps to be built near the village, and they were absolutely bristling with Roman soldiers, whose one idea was to please Caesar by conquering that last little village. Yet it still refused to surrender. One of the leading villagers was Asterix, a cunning little warrior who undertook all the most perilous missions. He was always accompanied by his inseparable friend Obelix, who was several times Asterix's size, and very good-natured, if not particularly bright. And Obelix usually took his little dog, Dogmatix, along. Another important person in the village was the venerable druid Getafix. He used to gather mistletoe and brew magic potions. His most famous potion gave the drinker superhuman strength, if only for a limited period of time. This potion, along with the native brain and brawn of the villagers, was the secret of their success in holding the Romans at bay. After a while, its effects wore off, but they lasted quite long enough for a few villagers to put the fear of their chief god Tutatis into a large contingent of Romans. As well as having a druid, every Gaulish village also had a bard to make music. The local bard was called Cacophonix. Unfortunately, he couldn't play the lyre or sing in tune. Cacophonix had a high opinion of his own musical genius. Everyone else thought he was unspeakable. But as long as he didn't speak, and particularly so long as he didn't sing, they liked him all right. Finally, there was Vital Statistics, the village chief, who was feared by his enemies and respected by his men. Most of the time, anyway. Vital Statistics feared nothing, except the sky falling on his head tomorrow. But as he always said, tomorrow never comes. Like the other villagers, he thoroughly enjoyed a good punch-up with the Romans, and a banquet afterwards, when they all feasted on wild boar, the favourite food of the Gauls. The wild boar themselves were not so keen on the feasting. In fact, it's with them that our story begins, in the quiet, peaceful depths of the Gaulish forest, where everything seemed to suggest that it was dinner time. Wolves were chasing foxes, foxes were chasing rabbits, bears were after honey, big birds were after little birds, woodpeckers were after trees. Come to think of it, perhaps the forest is not so quiet and peaceful after all, or not at dinner time. Some of the forest dwellers, however, seem to have lost their appetites. In particular, a wild boar with a brown coat, who was shedding copious tears and complaining to its companion, grunt, 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 it said. Its grey-coated friend, munching a leafy branch, replied, grunt, 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 oink, oink, oink. But maybe we should translate, just in case you've never learnt Piggish or any of its variants, such as the dialect of the South African Boers, or the Australian version known as swine. Here's a dubbed version. Are you quite sure we aren't likely to meet any of those crazy Gauls in the village? Asked the cheerful brown boar. I told you you're quite safe with me, said the grey boar. Why are you so scared? Because the Gauls have wolfed, crunched and gobbled up my whole herd, and I'm the sole survivor of a large family, that's why, exclaimed the brown boar hysterically. Calm down, do, said its grey friend, taking a nice dust bath. No need to carry on like a ham actor. I'll admit those Gauls are good at bringing home the bacon, but I decided that what must be cured can't be endured, and I've worked out an infallible system to foil them. Bet you anything, we never feature on the Gauls' menu. So who wins if you lose your bet? Asked the brown boar. As the two boars walked on through the forest, they entered a clearing, and found themselves facing three familiar figures. Recognition was mutual. Crazy Gauls, said the brown boar, bristling. Dinner, exclaimed Obelix, lunging towards the boars. Asterix and Dogmatix lunged too. The grey boar demonstrated its infallible system. It turned and ran, grunting to its brown friend, Quick, follow me! I tell you, it'll be a miracle if they get us! Ha! Grunted the brown boar following. Pigs might fly! If I ever get out of this, it grunted, I'll never be disgruntled with my lot again. By now Obelix had almost caught up with it. He had his arms spread for the final grab. "Eek!" squeaked the brown boar. "This Gaul's persistent as well as brawny. Talk about pig-headed." "Come on," gasped the grey boar. "We're nearly there." It knew just where it was going. It planned to pass a patrol of Roman soldiers. "Crazy Gauls!" yelped the patrol leader as the boars thundered past, followed by Asterix and Obelix. "Romans!" cried Obelix, applying the brakes. So did Asterix and Dogmatix. They changed direction and set about thumping the Roman patrol. The two boars strolled away. "See?" said the grey boar. "You only have to lead the Gauls to a Roman patrol and they forget about you. You feel a bit of a swine, but it saves you bacon." A little later, an extremely well-thumped Roman patrol reported back to the Roman camp of Compendium. "The Gauls have got a new wheeze," wheezed the patrol leader, touching his side. "They've trained wild boar to lead them straight to our patrols." "We can't have this," said the garrison commander. "Caesar must be informed." When the garrison commander's message reached Rome, Julius Caesar echoed his precise words. "No, we certainly can't have this," he shouted, pacing furiously up and down the marble halls of his palace, past several imposing classical marble statues of famous Romans on pedestals. He had summoned M. Divius Surreptitius, a tubby little Roman who was chief of MI-VI, the Roman Secret Service, MI6. "That Armorican village is still holding the might of Rome up to ridicule," fumed Caesar. "And I hear that my legions now have to face hordes of wild beasts, too. The morale of the troops is at a record low, and I'm the laughing-stock of my enemies in the Senate. Well, Divius Surreptitius, what do you say?" M. Divius Surreptitius raised a finger and began to orate. "As we all know, we have failed to conquer those indomitable Gauls by force, corruption, or even kidnapping. And yet—" He paused in a meaningful sort of way. "Come on, Surreptitius," said Caesar. "If you have a suggestion, spit it out, by Jupiter." "Oh, Caesar," Surreptitius went on, "the secrets of the Druids are passed on only by word of mouth from Druid to Druid." I know, snapped Caesar. "What about it?" "Simple," said Surreptitius. "No one but a Druid, who's also one of our spies, can get hold of the recipe for the magic potion which makes the Gauls invincible and then pass it on to us. And among my agents I have just such a Druid." "Then what are you waiting for? Fetch him," said Caesar. "He's already here, Caesar. Quite close to you," said Surreptitius, glancing up at one of the classical marble statues. "You can come down from your pedestal now, 006. Caesar turned in astonishment to stare at what he'd taken for the statue of a tall, thin man in cloak and tunic. The statue was clambering down from the pedestal and brushing off the chalk dust which had been covering him to make him look like marble. "What's the big idea?" thundered Caesar. "A spy in my palace? Just a little demonstration of my agent's inventive genius," Surreptitius explained. 006 failed his qualifying exams to be a Druid 6 times. That's how he gets his name. At the 7th attempt, his examiners were so tired of him that they passed him. But he's borne the Druids a grudge ever since, and his spite and avarice have made him our ablest spy among them." "Excellent," said Caesar, feeling a lot better already. He was quite impressed by the look of 006, who turned out, now as he brushed off all the chalk dust, to be a cadaverous character with black hair and eyebrows, wearing a white tunic, red cloak, and red shoes. "Excellent," repeated Caesar. "Bring me back the secret of the magic potion, and then I can fire that trying triumvirate that's trying to rule Rome. I'll become dictator of the whole Roman Empire, and your fortunes will be made." Surreptitius and 006 liked the sound of that. They saluted Caesar as they left, chorusing in Latin, "Ave Caesar, lucratore te salutant," which means, "Hail Caesar, those who are about to get rich, quick salute you." The spy and the spymaster left Caesar's presence. 006 was carrying a sizable wooden box under his arm. Surreptitius was carrying something much smaller on the tip of his forefinger. "Right. You're to set off for Gaul at once," he told the secret agent. and take this." He held up his forefinger. A small, very pretty blue fly was perched on it. She had big blue eyes and long eyelashes. "This is a carrier fly," explained Surreptitious. "She's trained to carry messages, and if necessary, she can bring me information by micro-papyrus in record time." The fly, who represented the first known use of a bug in espionage, took off from Surreptitious's finger and started buzzing round 006. No sooner had she set eyes on the secret agent than she fell hopelessly in love with him. 006 was handsome enough in his cadaverous sort of way, but as you will shortly discover, he was not a nice character. So this showed bad judgment on the fly's part. Surreptitious handed his agent a scroll. "And here are your secret instructions. Not to be read until you've left the city of Rome," he said. "How are you planning to travel?" "Like this," said 006, pressing a knob on his wooden box. "Watch." Surreptitious watched. The box opened. A cunning mechanism inside it went through a series of clinks, clanks, clonks, and clunks, and a smart, streamlined racing chariot of the very latest design unfolded before the spymaster's eyes. "I haven't quite worked out how to fold up the horses in a box too, though," said 006, scratching his head. However, he hired 2 handsome white horses, harnessed them to the chariot, and set off. Once he had left Rome, he stopped to unroll the scroll and read Surreptitious's secret instructions. They said, "Why render unto Caesar anything we can keep for ourselves? The magic potion will make us invincible. Then, like a double-headed eagle, you and I can rule the whole Roman Empire. Signed, M. Devious Surreptitious. P.S. After you have read this, the papyrus will self-destruct." Sure enough, as soon as 006 had read it, it burst into flames. "Ho, ho, ho!" the spy chuckled to himself. "Caesar and Surreptitious. What a couple of fools. Double-headed eagle, my foot. I plan to be a vulture, ruling the Gallo-Roman Empire alone." At this point, the infatuated carrier fly homed in on his cheek with a big kiss. "Oh, do leave me alone, you!" snapped 006, flicking her away as he drove on. Meanwhile, back on the Armorican coast, all was peace and calm in the little Gaulish village. Asterix sat outside his hut with Obelix, eating breakfast in the sunlight. Asterix was having a small leg of boar. Obelix had a whole boar to himself. "It's a funny thing," said Asterix, "but whenever we go wild boar hunting these days, we keep coming across Roman patrols." "Yes," agreed Obelix. "You'd think the Romans would know by now that boar is one of our sacred cows." "And you certainly go the whole hog eating it," commented Asterix, listening to his friend's noisy scrunching. Just then Getafix the Druid passed by. "Hello, Getafix, how are you?" said Asterix. "Have some boar." I'm fine, Asterix," said the Druid in an absent sort of way. No boar, thanks." And he walked on. "Don't you think our Druid's behaving rather oddly this morning?" said Asterix. "Definitely," said Obelix. "Fancy refusing boar." Chief Vital Statistics was sitting outside his hut with a foaming tankard as the Druid passed. "Hello, old Druid," he said cheerily. "I've just tapped a new barrel of beer. Want some?" "I'm not thirsty," said Getafix curtly, and he walked on, leaving Vital Statistics wondering what he could have said to offend the Druid. "Here, Getafix," called Unhygienics the fishmonger as the Druid passed his stall. "How would you like this lovely fresh fish?" Getafix suddenly lost his temper and turned on the fishmonger in a fury. "Eating and drinking, is that all you lot ever think about?" he snarled at the startled Unhygienics. A little later, the leading villagers were in consultation. They were feeling worried about their Druid. "Getafix isn't himself today," said Chief Vital Statistics. "There's certainly something on his mind," agreed Asterix. "He didn't even want my fish," said Unhygienics. "Very strange." "That's strange?" inquired Fully Automatics the blacksmith. "You can have fooled me." "Well, if Getafix has a problem, we must help him," the chief decided. "Asterix, you follow him discreetly, and see if you can find out the reason for his strange behaviour." Asterix went off, just in time to spot the Druid walking briskly out of the village and making for the sea. He followed. It was hours and hours before he returned. By the time he reported back to the others inside the chief's hut, it was dark. Getafix went down to the beach, he told them, and he stood there for ages, looking out to sea. The afternoon wore on, and he began pacing up and down, up and down. I kept in hiding behind some rocks and watched. At last, Getafix turned away from the shore and set off home, but he was looking very worried. I heard him say to himself out loud, "It will be terrible if he doesn't come. Appalling, ghastly, catastrophic." And then he reached his hut and slammed the door behind him. "By Tutatis," said Vital Statistics, greatly alarmed. "If Getafix is all that worried, the sky must be about to fall on our heads." Next morning, however, all was explained. The warrior on guard duty outside the village raced in, shouting, "Everyone, come quickly! Economic crisis! The Phoenician merchant has landed on the beach!" Economic Crisis was an old friend of the Gauls. He had once given Asterix and Obelix a lift to Rome in his ship, when they had to save Cacophonix from being thrown to the lions and the Circus Maximus. The Phoenician now regularly anchored off the Gaulish coast, bringing goods to trade. Getafix seemed delighted to hear the news. He hurried out of the door of his hut, exclaiming, "He's here at last!" and made his way through the village looking very cheerful. "Hello, Asterix, nice day, isn't it?" he called in passing. "I wouldn't mind a slice of that boar later." He reached the chief's hut, just as Vital Statistics was being carried out by his shield-bearers on his ceremonial shield. This was the way a Gaulish chief went about on official occasions, such as welcoming Phoenician merchants. "Morning, old chief," said Getafix cheerfully. "I wouldn't mind tasting your new barrel of beer, don't forget." And as he passed the fish stall and inhaled the amazing pong it gave off, he commented cheerfully, "Your fish has a really interesting aroma, unhygienics." "So Getafix was expecting economic crisis in his cargo," said the chief, as the villagers all made their way down to the seashore. "And he appreciated my fish, so there," the fishmonger told the blacksmith. "That's what worries me," said Fully Automatics. "Anyone in such a state of mind must be on the brink of suicide." Economic Crisis had set up a magnificent stall on the beach. It was covered with a spotless white cloth. It had a red awning over it, and the Phoenician seamen were rowing their wares over from the ship and setting them out on the stall. There were handsome jars and urns, there were baskets and caskets, brassware and pottery, gold and silver and exotic foodstuffs. Economic Crisis himself was a fine figure of a man, with a large round stomach and a large round double chin. The chin wore a pointy little beard and black whiskers. The stomach wore a white tunic and a sort of green kilt. And the rest of Economic Crisis wore a lot of gold jewellery. He spread his arms wide at the sight of Getafix, who strode to meet him, exclaiming, "So here you are at last, Economic Crisis, old chap." "Hello there, Getafix," said the Phoenician jovially. "I've been really looking forward to seeing you all again. Look what I've brought from the great city of Tyre, specially for you." But Getafix wasn't interested in the stuff on the stall. "I suppose you've brought what I ordered when you last put in here, haven't you?" Just remind me what that was, will you?" said Economic Crisis. "Rock oil, of course," said the Druid, looking anxious. Economic Crisis slapped his forehead. "By the great god Baal," he cried, swearing by the chief god of the Phoenicians. "I knew I'd forgotten something." "What?" bawled the Druid, going scarlet in the face, and grabbing the luckless merchant by his handsome gold breastplate. Economic Crisis tried to soothe him. "Now, don't get worked up. I can sell you purple, incense, spices, precious stone." "No!" bellowed Getafix, quite beside himself, thumping the Phoenician up and down on the ground in his frenzy. "I want rock oil. I absolutely must have—" He gurgled, going grey in the face. He clutched his chest and fell backwards to the beach. The other Gauls hurried to the Druid's aid. So did Economic Crisis, once he'd recovered from the thumping. The colour of Getafix's face had changed to green. His eyes were staring wildly. "Oh, you know what it is," said Fully Automatics, the blacksmith. "He's had a stroke. I've seen this before. My brother-in-law had one when the Roman quaestor sent him his tax demand." "Quick, Obelix, let's carry him back to his hut," said Asterix. "I'm ever so sorry," Economic Crisis apologised when Asterix, Obelix and Vital Statistics had got Getafix into bed. But why would anyone get in such a state over a common rock oil? What's rock oil anyway? Asked Asterix. Oil which gushes out of the rocky ground, hence its name, the Phoenician told him. Also known as naphtha. It's mainly found in Mesopotamia. But what's so special about this oil? Asked Asterix. Nothing, said Economic Crisis. He was as puzzled as the rest. You can burn it in an oil lamp, but it smells so bad no one uses it much. The chief felt Getafix's forehead. I'm worried, he said. He doesn't seem to be improving, and we can't dose him with magic potion because we've run out. Asterix, I think you better go and look for another druid to treat him. Before long, Asterix was on his way through the forest, accompanied by Obelix and Dogmatix. We must get help for Getafix, and quick. He's no longer in his salad days, he said. Obelix was not too sure where salad came into it, until he remembered about the oil. You'll need vinegar, too, to make a Gaulish dressing, he pointed out. But before this culinary discussion could go any further, Dogmatix started to growl fiercely. Next moment, they saw a fine green racing chariot drawn by two handsome white horses, and driven by a lean, cadaverous, dark-haired man with a little blue fly buzzing affectionately round his head. Dogmatix began barking furiously. He went on growling even when Obelix called him to heel. Who are you? Asterix asked the driver. Where do you come from and what are you doing? My name is 006, the driver replied, and I'm a wandering druid. I come from nowhere in particular and I offer my knowledge and services to those who need them. Can you cure a druid who slipped on an oily rock? Asked Obelix. Not a very common accident, but I believe I can cope, said 006. A brief explanation from Asterix showed him that this was just the opportunity he needed to insinuate himself into the Gaulish village. He took the two Gauls and Dogmatix up in his chariot, and soon they were bowling along the coastal road leading to the village. What luck we met you, said Asterix. Our druid Getafix really needs your care. What luck I met them, thought 006. Their druid needs my care too. But an unexpected setback faced him. A mounted band of Romans blocked the way. Halt! Ordered the Roman captain. This is a checkpoint. Oh no, thought 006. These fools will ruin everything. He could hardly tell the soldiers he was spying for Rome without giving the whole game away to the Gauls. Goody! A Roman roadblock, said Obelix, pleased at the prospect of a punch-up. There's no time to play around, Obelix, said Asterix. Getafix is waiting. Don't be frightened, said 006. I'll fix this. He pressed a button on his cunningly designed chariot, and two wickedly sharp scythe blades shot out from the sides, sending the horses ridden by the Romans scurrying for safety. Frightened? Us frightened? This druid is crazy, muttered Obelix incredulously, as the chariot shot ahead. Meanwhile, the Romans had got control of their horses again. Follow them! Shouted the Roman leader. Soon the mounted Romans had almost caught up. 006 pressed yet another button. Jets of noxious black vapour spouted from tubes fitted under the chariot, blinding the Romans. They couldn't see where they were going, so they all bumped into each other with much clashing and clanging. When the vapour finally cleared, they found themselves and their horses lying in a tangled heap. One horse was kneeling right on top of its rider. Join the light cavalry, they said back in Rome, groaned one soldier ruefully. We should have shown more horse sense, agreed another. You said it. Straight from the horse's mouth, gasped a third. My chest feels a little hoarse, croaked the man underneath his mount. But their captain, raising his head from the ground, sounded remarkably cheerful. Don't get on your high horse, he said. They can't go far. They're making straight for the edge of the cliff, so they'll soon be horsed to combat. We've thrown those Romans off now, 006 told the Gauls. Don't be frightened. But Asterix, looking ahead, had seen danger. Watch out, the cliff! He yelled. Frightened of what, may I ask? Obelix was still grumbling as the horses plunged over the edge. These insinuations are getting me down. It's all taken care of, said 006 confidently, pressing yet another button. Nothing happened. Or anyway, not until the horses went head first into the sea, taking the chariot, the driver, and his passengers with them. The only member of the party to remain dry was the carrier fly, who didn't think it was in the line of duty for her to get wet. "Something should have happened when I pressed that button," murmured 006, as the horses crossly pulled the dripping chariot back on land and made for the village. "Well, we were more frightened than hurt," he added consolingly, as they passed through the gateway. This was just too much for Obelix, who didn't know the meaning of fear. He thrust his furious face into the agents. "Hey, you! Just hold your horses! Now listen here!" he roared. "Your friend quite frightens me sometimes," gasped 006, when Asterix had calmed Obelix down and was leading the way into the druid's hut. "Don't mind him. He has a heart of gold, really," said Asterix. "Now, here's Getafix." Chief Vital Statistics was anxiously watching over the druid. "He hasn't come round yet," he said. "I'm really worried." 006 took a quick look at the green-faced patient, and then produced a leather flask from his pouch. "I think I have just the tonic to buck him up," he said, trickling some amber liquid between the druid's lips. Getafix gurgled, spluttered, and choked. Then his face returned to his normal colour. He sat up in bed and hiccuped. "Oh, yes, that's good," he murmured. "Oh, what is it?" "A green spirit called Caledonian," 006 said. Caledonia was the ancient name for Scotland. The spy looked a little doubtfully at Getafix. He had certainly been revived. Perhaps he was just a little too merry for his own good. "It may be a bit strong neat," said 006. "I've an idea it might be better diluted with a spot of soda." No, it's fine. Said the druid, putting back some more Caledonian. He tumbled out of bed and began dancing a reel, singing a traditional song at the same time. "Oh, you'll take... he concluded, reeling back into the arms of Asterix. "Oh, very well done," Vital Statistics said sarcastically to the visiting druid. "He's on his feet again, but off his head." However, once the effects of the amber potion had worn off, Getafix was himself again. Except he was now in low spirits and had a nasty headache. Sitting by the hearth and wearing a wet towel on his head, he explained the trouble to Vital Statistics and the others. "You want to know why I think rock oil is so important? I'll tell you. It's liquid gold. Without rock oil, known to the Romans as petroleum, we shall have no more magic potion." 006, with the carrier fly still buzzing attentively around him, listened thoughtfully to this announcement. "But what's this oil got to do with our potion?" asked the chief. "I must now reveal that it's one of the potion's many ingredients," said the druid solemnly. "And I'm sorry to say, I haven't got a single drop left. Although I need only 1 drop of rock oil per batch of magic potion, that 1 drop is absolutely essential." Obelix had become aware of a fly buzzing insistently round their visitor's head. He wondered if he could swat it, and clapped his hands suddenly. "Help my carrier fly," thought the spy. She might be a nuisance, but he knew he needed her to carry messages. "Missed," said Obelix, disappointed. The spy breathed a sigh of relief. "But this is terrible," said Chief Vital Statistics. "What's to become of us? There'll be no one left able to defend the village but Obelix." Obelix was getting really fed up. First, people kept suggesting he was frightened. Then he couldn't catch a fly. Then they reminded him he never got any magic potion. "Because, as everyone knows," he said loudly and sarcastically, "I fell into the cauldron of potion when I was a baby, and it had a permanent effect on me, and blah, 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 rhubarb, rhubarb, rhubarb." "We've been in worse trouble before," said Asterix bravely. "I'll tell you what. With our chief's permission, I'll travel to Mesopotamia and bring back some rock oil." "What about me?" said Obelix. "No, Obelix," said the chief. "You're staying to defend the village if the Romans attack." "Oh, no, I'm not," said Obelix. "I want to go to Mesopotamia, that oily place too." "Obelix has a point," said Getafix. "Such a long, dangerous journey may present problems. 2 men ought to go." "And meanwhile," said the anxious chief, "let's hope Caesar's spies don't find out how weak we are." 006 thoughtfully massaged his chin. Shisha would pay handsomely for this information, he thought. But I believe I can do even better. And he began laying his plans. They involved taking a walk through the village with Getafix. Now that 006 had cured the druid with his amber potion, they were on good terms. He broached the question cautiously. Getafix, I am a druid too. Would you give me the recipe for the magic potion? Said Getafix thoughtfully. What would you do with it? Oh, just help the weak and oppressed a bit, said the spy craftily. Getafix approved of that. Well, maybe, he said. I might tell you if I can't get hold of all the ingredients I need to make it myself, but I'm sure Asterix will bring me back some rock oil. And that, thought 006, meant he must make sure Asterix's mission failed. You're quite right, Getafix, he said out loud. I should like to contribute to the success of this venture myself. I'll go to Mesopotamia with Asterix and Obelix, and use my skills to help them. The day of departure came, and the villagers saw the travellers off. Dogmatix was going too, of course. Standing on his shield, Chief Vital Statistics gave them a pep talk. And remember, the fate of the village is in your hands. Without potion, we haven't got a leg to stand on. Or a shield either, thought 006. Getafix gave Asterix his very last gourd of magic potion. Luckily I kept this in reserve, he said. You may need it. And keep an eye on 006, he added in a low voice. Something tells me not to trust him. Don't worry, I will, Asterix promised. Soon he and his companions had been rowed out to the Phoenician ship, an imposing vessel propelled by a red and cream striped sail and a great many pairs of oars. As the ship began moving out to sea, Asterix looked around. Where's 006, he wondered. I'm sure he came on board. I noticed he had a fly buzzing round him as usual. 006 had gone below decks with that same fly. In private, he wrote a message on a tiny scrap of papyrus and tied it to her back. Then he let her out through a porthole on the side of the ship. Take my message to Surreptitious, he said, and no dawdling on the way. This is urgent. Fluttering her long lashes at the spy, a carrier fly gave him a loving farewell look and set off on her dangerous mission. On her flight from Gaul to Rome, she had to face storms with thunder and lightning and avoid flocks of seabirds who wanted to eat her. Finally, homing in on the apartments of M. Devious Surreptitious, the smallest member of Caesar's secret service, reached her journey's end, and, worn out, plopped into the spymaster's bowl of soup. Yuck! A fly in my soup! How revolting! Said Surreptitious, picking her out. Then he saw the message. It's the carrier fly! He exclaimed. Let's see what 006 has to say. While the fly shook soup off her wings, muttering crossly, What's bugging him? Surreptitious read the spy's report. It said, Am on Phoenician ship bound for Mesopotamia with indomitable Gauls. At all costs prevent landing. Well, I suppose 006 has his reasons, thought Surreptitious. I'll go and give the necessary orders. And you must fly straight back to 006, he told the carrier fly. Shoo! Buzz off! He had made a mistake. The beautiful spy fly had her pride, and her feelings were injured. Watch out, she buzzed. I could be the fly in your ointment. Right, I will buzz off. Meanwhile, 006 was sailing the high seas with Asterix and Obelix, who had noticed something a little odd. It's funny, Asterix, he said. 006 hasn't been attracting insects lately. No, agreed Asterix thoughtfully. I fancy there are no flies on that druid. Economic crisis is making good speed with the ship's big sail and all its oars. Last time the Gauls travelled with him, the men at the oars had been partners in his business. Partners who had failed to read the small print of their contracts. See, it had said they had to row. Looking down on the oarsmen labouring away, Asterix asked if they were partners too. No, said Economic Crisis. I've started up a package holiday business. These are holiday makers, and I'm their tour operator. A sharp operator too, though I say it myself. Just then a cry came down from the lookout man stationed at the masthead. "Sail ahoy, Mr. Tour Operator! Customers!" cried Economic Crisis gleefully. "Quick! Hoist the flag!" The flag was run up to the top of the mast. When it fluttered out in the breeze, you could see that it bore a slogan saying "Special Bargain Fortnight." "The customers are hoisting a black flag in reply," the lookout man called down. "Oh no!" exclaimed Economic Crisis. "It's the pirates who roam these Gaulish waters. They'll steal all my merchandise." That was exactly what the pirates had in mind, as they came sailing up in their fine new ship with its dragon figurehead. They were confident they could capture any merchant vessel as long as it didn't carry any of those crazy Gauls who defeated them whenever they met. And why would there be any crazy Gauls on a Phoenician ship? "Shiver me timbers, me hearties, that ship's cargo will make our fortunes," said the pirate captain, chuckling happily. However, Economic Crisis planned to defend his cargo. He addressed his oarsmen. Holiday makers! Do you know an exciting new game called Naval Battles? Oh, great fun!" "No, Mr. Tour Operator," said their spokesman firmly. "We've tired of your idea of on-board holiday entertainment anyway. We want to get home as soon as possible, go back to work for a bit of a rest." "I don't think we can count on the holiday maker's sense of fun, Obelix," said Asterix. "Goody," said Obelix. "That means more fun for us." The prospect of bashing a few pirates was an unexpected treat. "Yoo-hoo!" the Gauls hailed them as the ships drew close. The pirates already had their grappling irons out. Then they saw their old acquaintances. Too late. "The Gauls!" gasped the wooden-legged first mate. Before long, a battle with the pirates was in full swing. Dogmatix joined in too. He loved chasing pirates. Obelix was slightly disappointed. "They seem a bit soft, in spite of the bracing sea breezes," he complained, tucking two pirates under his arms before knocking their heads together. "Yes, they're all at sea," Asterix agreed, while Dogmatix took a bite out of the seat of the pirate captain's trousers. Economic Crisis and his crew of holidaymakers were watching appreciatively. "There," he said, "didn't I promise you good, clean fun on this voyage?" "Funniest thing I ever saw," agreed one of the crew. 006 watched with mixed feelings. It wasn't going to be easy to stop those two Gauls landing safely. The pirate captain soon surrendered. Dogmatix stood guard over him, growling ferociously, as he begged, "Please spare my nice new ship. I haven't finished paying for her yet." "Do we sink her and make sail, Asterix?" inquired Obelix. "No, we don't sink her. We make her sail," said Asterix. "You'd like to buy up the entire stock our ship is carrying, wouldn't you?" he told the pirate captain. "Oh, me?" said the pirate captain faintly. But he had no choice. Soon Obelix and the Phoenician crew were carrying the ship's expensive cargo on board the pirate ship, while Economic Crisis counted the money Asterix had made the pirates pay him. 1,999, 2,000 sestertii. That's it," he said. "You've ruined me," moaned the pirate captain. "How am I going to pay the last 3 instalments on my ship?" "Sell our merchandise on, of course," Asterix told him. And the two ships went their separate ways. The pirates were far from happy, although the first mate, who had a classical education, tried to console them with a Latin quotation. "Non omnia possumus omnes," he told them. "We can't all do everything." "Whatever he means by possumus, I vote we play possum next time," said the lookout man. "Anyway, I saved the ship, didn't I?" said the pirate captain defensively. By way of contrast, spirits were high on the Phoenician ship. "Well done, friends," said the Economic Crisis. "As salesmen, you certainly packed plenty of punch." "They should win a free holiday," suggested one of the oarsmen. 006 was getting quite worried. "I only hope the Romans can do better than those stupid pirates," he thought. Just then the Phoenician lookout man shouted down again, "Another sail ahoy, Mr. Tour Operator!" And over the horizon came the grand, majestic sight of a great Roman war galley. He had a huge white sail with a Roman laurel wreath on it in gold. He had even more oars than the Phoenician ship, and its decks were lined with tough, heavily armed Roman soldiers. "Phoenician ship ahead!" called the Roman lookout man. "It'll be the one carrying those indomitable Gauls they told us about," said the Roman sea captain. "Now for a great display of naval operations Roman fashion. This'll be my magnum opus." In fact, it was going to be his opus #1, but he looked every inch the tough sea dog, and he wasn't going to let on that he'd never actually fought a naval battle before. The centurion commanding the legionaries stood beside him. "Just remember, Caesar wants this op to succeed, Captain," he warned. On board the Phoenician vessel, Obelix was clapping his hands with delight. "Goody Romans," he said happily. "Now we can have some real fun at last." "Something tells me they're not here for fun," said Asterix. He was right. 006 had put 2 and 2 together. "Sure, the carrier fly delivered my message," he thought. "Well done, the Secret Service." And he settled down to enjoy watching the superbly efficient boarding tactics practiced by the Roman navy. First, they threw out grappling hooks, powered by huge catapults, so that they could travel a long way. Once the grappling hooks had taken hold of the enemy's ship, the Romans just had to pull the 2 vessels together. The ships collided sideways on. Asterix decided that though he hadn't needed potion to fight the pirates, a drop or so of the druid's parting gift might be a good idea before tackling all those Romans. "Shall we get 'em, Obelix?" he suggested. "Let's get 'em, Asterix," said Obelix, picking up Dogmatics. Seizing a couple of ropes, the Gauls swung themselves over to the Roman galley with a mighty shout of "Board 'em!" "Hey, you can't do that!" shouted the Roman sea captain. "That's a foul!" "You got it the wrong way round," protested the centurion. "We are boarding you, see?" Next moment, both Roman officers had been knocked flying as the 2 Gauls landed on deck. Soon they were happily thumping Romans. Asterix broke into a sea shanty as he knocked legionary after legionary out of his army's sandals and into the air. "Farewell and adieu to you, bold Roman soldiers, farewell and adieu to you, soldiers of Rome," he sang, although it was not quite farewell and adieu, because a minute or so later the soldiers either fell back on deck, armour clanging, or splashed into the sea. Dogmatics was growling and chasing Romans for all he was worth. The only thing bothering Obelix was that the game looked like ending too soon. "It's always the same," he grumbled. "As soon as the Romans feel they're outnumbered, they won't play any more." Economic Crisis and his crew watched appreciatively once again as the 2 Gauls and their dog took on the entire body of Roman legionaries. "These water sports really pep things up," said one oarsman. "What a shame I've nothing left to sell the Romans," mourned Economic Crisis. 006 could hardly believe his eyes. "It's not true," he told himself. "It just can't be true." But it was, and soon the huge Roman galley was sinking, while the centurion clung to a bit of wreckage, muttering angrily, "And that fool of a sea captain said this was his magnum opus." Julius Caesar was furious to hear that the 2 indomitable Gauls and their dog were smashing up his galleys. He summoned the top admirals of the Roman fleet and bawled them out. "By Jupiter," he thundered, "those Gauls shall feel my anger. I want all the Mediterranean ports blockaded. Look sharp, I don't expect my naval commanders to sit about contemplating their navals. We must make sure not even a fly could get through our net." Caesar stopped and thought for a moment. Flies? What about that new-fangled bug the Secret Service was using? He yelled for the head of MI6. "Surreptitious!" M, devious surreptitious, had been slipping quietly away. He didn't want to confess that the fly had buzzed off. However, he had to obey his master's voice. "Any news your agent double what's-it, surreptitious?" Caesar asked. I'm afraid we have a communications problem, Caesar," said the spymaster. "Our carrier fly is going slow, and supposing she actually goes on strike—" Caesar interrupted him furiously. "Well, if we're going to discuss wildlife, how do you fancy finding out whether the lions in the Circus Maximus are on hunger strike?" Surreptitious fled, wondering how the Hades to entice the carrier fly back. He found a huge jar of honey, opened it, and dipped in a ladle. "Where's a pretty fly, then?" he said in honeyed tones. Every fly in ancient Rome came buzzing to the scene. Swarms of them descended on the honey jar. His head hidden in a cloud of flies, surreptitious method. I might have known it. Meanwhile, the Phoenician ship emerged victorious from its naval campaign and sailed peacefully on its way. It had rounded the coast of Hispania, now Spain, and was sailing through the Mediterranean, making for Tyre, the famous Phoenician seaport on the coast of Mesopotamia. Now that the supply of pirates and Romans had dried up, Obelix was bored. "Asterix, I'm tired of this voyage," he complained, "and I get hungry when I'm tired." "Hold on a bit longer, Obelix," said Asterix. "We should soon be landing at Tyre." Sure enough, next moment a call came down from the Phoenician lookout man. "Don't Tyre now! Here comes Tyre!" They furled their sail and rowed gently towards the port of Tyre, a city built partly on an island. But to the surprise of Economic Crisis and his crew, they couldn't get through the harbour mouth. It was blocked by Roman warships, reams and reams and reams of them. Biremes, triremes, quadremes, quinqueremes, you name it. There was no getting past them. "I've never seen so many warships together before," said Economic Crisis, shading his eyes to look at this warlike array. "What's it all in aid of?" "I rather think we're about to find out," said Asterix. And they were. Next moment, fiery arrows shot by Roman archers and rocks hurled by Roman catapults began landing in the sea all around them. "We must get out of here, fast," said Economic Crisis. "All hands to the oars and full speed astern." 006 was relieved. Julius Caesar's not such a silly old geezer after all, he thought. Economic Crisis tried to make the best of it. "Well," he said, "we can always land at Sidon, Byblos, or Arad." However, he was proved wrong. Exactly the same thing happened outside the ports of Sidon, Byblos, and Arad. Fiery arrows and rocks hurled by catapults drove them back out to sea again. Things were getting desperate. "I'm hungry," wailed Obelix. "Sorry," said Economic Crisis. "We had just enough provisions to last us to Tyre, and now they're practically all gone." As the sun sank over the Mediterranean Sea, amid clouds of yellow and purple, the Gauls sat down on deck to see what there was for supper. "All the cook could produce is soup," said the crewman serving it up. "This is ominous," sighed Economic Crisis. "I suspected it before, and now I'm sure of it," said Asterix, drinking his watery soup. "The Romans have been warned. They know what we're after." But how could that be?" asked the crafty 006. "I mean, we're the only ones who—" He never finished his sentence, because at that moment a fly dive-bombed into his soup. "Yuck!" said the spy, fishing it out. "I can't stand flies in my soup." Then he did a double-take. The fly had a message tied to its tiny back. "It's the bug," thought 006. It was indeed the carrier fly. She perched on his thumbnail, fluttering her eyelashes at him. "You can see we're near the coast here," Obelix whispered to his friend. "That druid's attracting insects again." 006 heard this as he made his way to the cabins. He must read the message the fly was carrying at once. "I have a fellow feeling of a poor little flies, he explained. "This one needs my help." And he slipped away. Obelix tapped his forehead. "That druid is crazy," he said. "Still, you must admit, he wouldn't hurt a fly," Asterix pointed out. Alone in his cabin, 006 opened a pot of honey for the carrier fly and read the message he'd brought. It said, "Get a move on. Caesar is waiting and so are the lions. Signed M, Devious Surreptitious." He took out his stylus to reply. "I'm sure the Gauls won't give up at this point," he thought. "I'll tell Caesar to have all stocks of rock oil in Palestine destroyed." The carrier fly felt better after sipping some honey. The worst of these long-distance flights was the jet lag, she thought. Now perhaps she could get some rest. She was out of luck. "This message must go by return of post," said the spy, tying it to her back. "Be quick, little fly. Success and my fortune depend on you." "And to think I'm stuck with loving him," sighed the fly as she buzzed wearily off on the return journey to Rome. "Men are so inconsiderate." Up on deck, Asterix was apologizing to the Phoenician merchant. "I'm so sorry we've caused you all these problems, Economic Crisis." "I'll think nothing of it," replied their old friend. "I'd rather enjoy cocking a snook at the Romans. Anyway, tomorrow we'll be sailing down the coast of the kingdom of Judea, land of the Hebrews. I promise you'll find Judea a more hospitable land. And when the sun had risen next morning, Economic Crisis escorted the Gauls, their dog, and the disguised spy ashore. They landed on a sandy beach. "There's the promised land, Asterix," said Economic Crisis. "I suggest you go to Jerusalem and tell the merchant Sampsonalius I sent you. He's my supplier. I'm sure he'll be able to provide you with some rock oil." The Gauls waved their Phoenician friend a fond goodbye as he was rowed back to his ship. "Thanks, Economic Crisis," called Asterix. "See you soon, maybe." "I certainly hope so," Economic Crisis called back. "Travelling with you two is an enriching experience." "I'm still hungry, you know," Obelix pointed out as the three of them and Dogmatic started off inland. "Do you think there are any wild boars here?" "Never mind that now," said Asterix, striding briskly on. "We've got to find our way." He looked around for any local inhabitants and saw a black-bearded young man wearing a striped robe and matching headdress walking along beside a donkey. "There's a Hebrew. He might be able to help us," said Asterix, hailing the young man. "Hi there, friend. Can you tell us the way to Jerusalem?" "Why, my donkey and I are going there ourselves," said the Hebrew in friendly tones. "Let's join forces." As they went along, they all introduced themselves. "My name's Joshua Ben Zedrin," said the young man. "And I'm Asterix," said Asterix. "Meet Obelix, Dogmatics, and 006 a Druid. We've come from Gaul to buy rock oil from the merchant Sampsonalius," he explained. "Rock oil?" said Ben Zedrin in surprise. "I wouldn't have thought anyone would come so far for that." "Are there many Romans here?" inquired 006 craftily. "Not as many as in Phoenicia," said the young man. "Phoenicia is a Roman province. We're only a protectorate here in Judea, and the Romans don't have a strong garrison in Jerusalem." It was certainly useful to have a local man as a guide. After a while, Joshua Ben Zedrin found a good place for a rest. "Let's stop and camp here," he suggested. "Do you think that means it's dinner time, Asterix?" Obelix whispered. Ben Zedrin saw his hopeful look. Undoing the pouch he carried slung around him, he said hospitably, "You can share my meal, though I have nothing but dried fruit to offer." No, we wouldn't like to deprive you," said Asterix. Obelix wasn't so sure. "Are you absolutely certain you haven't got any wild boar?" he asked. "Even dried wild boar would do." "You mean pork?" "Oh, no, we're forbidden to eat pork by the law and the prophets." "You mean pork butchers can't make profits here?" said Obelix, puzzled. "No, I mean Leviticus chapter 11, verse 7, Ben Zedrin told him. Despite such mutual misunderstandings, however, they all quickly made friends, and the journey to Jerusalem was a peaceful one. After several days on the road, the Gauls finally saw the great royal city lying ahead of them behind its high walls. Once the capital of King David, Jerusalem was now in Roman hands. As they approached the city, Joshua Ben Zedrin saw an acquaintance and hailed him. "Shalom, Isaiah, what's new?" "Nothing much," said Isaiah, a white-bearded elderly gentleman leading a camel laden with baskets and rolls of cloth. "But the Romans have doubled their guard and are keeping a close watch on all the city gates," he added. "What are they looking for?" asked Ben Zedrin. Isaiah glanced at the Gauls. "3 Gauls and a dog, and if I were your friends I'd watch my step," he said, leading his camel on. "Good," thought the crafty 006. "Sure the carrier fly got through again with my message to surreptitious." Asterix turned to their new friend Ben Zedrin. "Joshua, we'd better say goodbye now. We don't want to make trouble for you." "But why are the Romans looking for you?" asked the young man, puzzled. "They're trying to stop us buying rock oil to take back to Gaul," Asterix explained. "Oh, so now they're planning to put small traders out of business, are they?" said Joshua Ben Zedrin indignantly. "This'll never do. Follow me. We'd better not go up to the gates of Jerusalem if they're being watched. I'll take you to a friend of mine who lives in a village nearby. The Romans won't look for you there, and tonight we'll find some way to get you in over the city walls." "That's very kind of you, Joshua, but why are you taking the risk of helping us?" Asterix asked as they walked away from Jerusalem again. "All the Hebrews distrust the power of Rome," said Ben Zedrin, "so we like to help those who oppose it. Look, here we are, not far to go now," he said as they came in sight of a little village of white houses ahead, nestling among the rolling hills of Palestine. Ben Zedrin's friend in the village gave him a hospitable welcome, and at last Obelix got what he considered a decent meal. "I never saw such an appetite," whispered the mistress of the house to her daughter. "Nor did I," her daughter whispered back. "That's the 10th stuffed carp the big Gaul has eaten, and he still wants more." Carp was not quite as good as boar, thought Obelix, but it was a lot better than nothing. After a hearty meal, the Gauls felt rather weary. Their host noticed. "If you'd like a rest until it's time to set out, I can only offer you the stable, but you'll find it's quite comfortable," he suggested. "Get some rest, and I'll come and fetch you tonight," said Joshua ben Zedrin. So the 2 Gauls, their dog and the spy, settled down on piles of straw in the stable, together with Ben Zedrin's donkey and a friendly ox. "He was right. It is comfortable," said Asterix drowsily. "Any idea what this village is called, 006? "Bethlehem, I think," said the spy. It seemed as if they'd been asleep only a few minutes when Joshua ben Zedrin came to wake them up again. "Time to leave," he said. "There are friends waiting for us on the walls of Jerusalem." Luckily it was a moonlit night, so they had quite an easy journey back to Jerusalem. At last they reached the city walls, which towered to the sky above them. Several bearded men were waiting on the top of the walls with ropes to help the Gauls up. "Here we are," whispered Ben Zedrin. "Keep your voices down. I'm afraid the Romans might surprise us." "It's the Romans who'd be surprised," said Obelix. 006 was thinking frantically. "I must tip off the Roman sentries somehow," he thought. "Wait a minute. Suppose I tip myself off the wall, that is." Asterix was the first to scale the high wall, with the help of the men pulling the rope from above. He let the rope down again. "Your turn now," said Ben Zedrin, handing it to 006. 006 got about halfway up, and then put his plan into practice. "Here goes," he thought, deliberately letting go and falling to the ground again. Then he made an almighty fuss. "Ouch! Oh, I hurt myself! Oh! Shut him up, will you, Obelix?" hissed Asterix from above. "If you've quite finished wailing at this wall," said Obelix, bringing his hefty fist down on the spy's head and stunning him. But the noise he made had already done its work. A large party of Roman soldiers came racing along from the nearest gate, shouting, "It's them! It's those Gauls! Get 'em!" "Romans!" exclaimed Joshua ben Zedrin, alarmed. "Romans!" exclaimed Obelix, delighted. "Goody, goody, goody!" And he set about demolishing the legionaries, whirling their commander round his head and using the man as a weapon. "These Romans are crazy," he said happily. "I'm at my best with my back to the wall." "Grrr!" growled Dogmatics, standing 4 square against the wall too. "Hang on, Obelix, here I am," called Asterix, coming back down the wall on the rope. He kicked several Romans backwards as he swung down. Thump went the Gauls. Whoosh, crash, bang! Before long, all the Roman soldiers had been knocked unconscious. "Quick, over the wall," said Ben Zedrin. "The Romans are on the alert now." "I wouldn't call this lot very alert at the moment," said Asterix, looking at the recumbent legionaries. "I liked it better at sea," said Obelix regretfully. "Romans seem softer on terra firma." However, they did as Joshua ben Zedrin wanted, and scrambled up the wall, leaving 006 behind with his Roman friends. "By Yahweh," said Ben Zedrin, as he led them off to the moonlit streets of the city. "You and those Romans were quite something. It was like our hero David in the olden days facing Goliath. What a beating they took." "I'm not sorry to be rid of that spying druid either," said Asterix. "I had my suspicions of 006 all along. I'm sure he set up that racket on purpose to raise the alarm." They reached a handsome flat-roofed house. "This is where Sampsonalius the merchant lives," said Ben Zedrin, leading them in. Soon they were in a lamplit warehouse full of rugs, jars, and all kinds of other goods, and were introduced to a little man in a purple robe and cap. "Here are some customers from very far away," Joshua told him. "We'd like some rock oil, and we're in a great hurry," Asterix explained. "Aye, aye, aye, oh dear," exclaimed Samson in dismay. "The Romans have just burnt all our stocks of rock oil. Don't ask me why. I very much fear you won't find a single drop in the whole country." Asterix was horrified. "But we must take some rock oil back to Gaul. It's vital," he said. "Then you'll have to go to the place where they find it," said Sampsonalius. "It comes from near Babylon, in Mesopotamia." "How many miles to Babylon?" asked Asterix. "Well, it's 30 days' journey, and you'd have to cross the desert," said the merchant. "Look, Here's my assistant, Saul Beneficial, he added, introducing a smiling, round-faced young man. At sunrise, he'll guide you out of the city and to the edge of the desert. Saul Beneficial was carrying 2 sets of striped Judean robes and headdresses. Wear these, and you'll pass unnoticed, he told the Gauls. How can we ever thank you? Asterix gratefully asked Samson. Oh, if you aim to give the Romans trouble, we're quits, said the merchant. But your own name sounds rather Roman, said Asterix curiously. I mean, Samson alias? I took this alias for business reasons, Samson explained. My real name is Rosenblumen-Thalovich. At dawn, the Gauls and Saul Beneficial waved goodbye to Samson and Joshua and set off. Asterix and Obelix were disguised in their Judean robes. Obelix had a striped brown and yellow outfit. Asterix's robe and headdress were striped green and cream. No one challenged them as they walked out through the city gates leading a couple of camels. Dogmatix was perched among the provisions and rolls of bedding on one of the camels, barking cheerfully at the prospect of an adventure. You're right, Beneficial. We do pass unnoticed in this disguise, said Asterix. And the vertical stripes are very slimming too, said Obelix, admiring the enormous curve of his stomach under the brown and yellow robe. Meanwhile, in the palace of the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate, no relation of the pirates encountered earlier in the story, 006 had revealed his identity and his mission, and the captain of the Roman guard was reporting on the night's events. Ave, O Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea. The Gauls got away, and we fear they've made good their escape now. You must do something, procurator, said 006 urgently. Once they're outside my territory, my dear 006, I couldn't care less what they do, said the procurator lazily, dipping his hands for the umpteenth time into a bowl of water held by a servant. I wish he'd stop this nervous habit of washing his hands so often, thought 006. It's really getting me down. Well, never mind, he reflected. The Gauls are bound to go back on board ship at some point, and when they do, we'll be waiting for them with a reception committee. At the moment, however, the only ships our friends were boarding were ships of the desert. Saul Beneficial rowed one, Obelix, Asterix, and Dogmatix rowed the other. Obelix was still upset about the local attitude to wild boar. You know, it makes me sick, Asterix, he said suddenly. What? Said Asterix. Oh, yes, I have to admit these camels give a rather bumpy ride. I didn't mean that, said his friend. It makes me sick to think of the racial discrimination against boars they practice in this country. Saul Beneficial interrupted him. We're coming to the Dead Sea, he said. The sea! Yippee! Cried Obelix, jumping off his camel and shedding his robes. I could just do with a nice dip in this hot weather. And clad only in his blue and white striped Gaulish breeches, he plunged in. Or rather, he tried to plunge in. All he could do was bounce on the surface, much to the amusement of Asterix, Dogmatix, and Beneficial, who stood on the bank laughing their heads off. I was going to warn you, Beneficial explained. The Dead Sea has a salt content 6 times higher than other seas, and its density is such that the human body just floats on top. Well, he continued, we're on the outskirts of the desert now. I must leave you here and go back to my master. You'll find your way to Mesopotamia easily enough. Just go straight east. Thanks again, Beneficial, said Asterix, shaking hands warmly as they parted. Then he and Obelix and Dogmatix went on across the desert by themselves. It looked like being an unpleasant journey. The desert was burning hot by day and freezing cold at night. 30 days of this is going to be monotonous, said Asterix, as they forged grimly ahead. Monotonous, however, was not exactly the word. Their new friends had forgotten to warn the Gauls about the various tribes who roamed the desert trying to wipe each other off the face of the earth. The policy of these tribes was to shoot first and ask questions later. All of a sudden, the Gauls heard a plunk. They saw first one arrow, then another, then a whole flight of them landing in the sand at their feet. Quick, take cover, shouted Asterix, and they made their way for the shelter of the nearest dunes. Dogmatix scampered along beside them. Who are you? A voice challenged them. Armorican Gauls, said the Gauls. Oh, terribly sorry, said the voice. The Gauls emerged from cover to see a party of men with bare chests and hairy brown kilts, heavily armed with spears, shields, and arrows. Their leader was holding out a friendly hand. Terribly sorry, he repeated. We thought you were Acadians. We're Sumerians, and we're at war with the Acadians. Well, get your facts straight first another time, Asterix suggested. I ask you, do we look like Acadians? Said Obelix, who of course had no notion what Acadians did look like. These Sumerians are crazy, he added as they went their separate ways. A little while later the Gauls heard another plunk. They saw first one arrow, then another, then a whole flight of them landing in the sand at their feet. "Take cover!" yelled Asterix. "Who are you?" asked a voice. "We're Gauls," said the Gauls. "Oh, terribly sorry," said the leader of a band of men coming round the next dune. They had curly black beards and pointy helmets, and they too were heavily armed with spears, shields, and arrows. "Awfully sorry," he repeated. "We thought you were Hittites. We Acadians don't hit it off with the Hittites. In fact, we're at war with them." "Well, don't drag us in," snapped Asterix. "I ask you, do we look like Hittites?" said Obelix. "And I thought things were going to be monotonous," said Asterix as they moved on. "These Acadians are crazy," said Obelix. Before they'd gone much further, the Gauls heard yet another plunk. They saw first one arrow, then another, and a whole flight of them landing in the sand at their feet. "Take cover!" yelled Asterix. "Who are you?" asked a voice. "We're Gauls," said the Gauls wearily. "Oh, so sorry," said the leader of the next band of warriors to emerge from the dunes. They were beardless. They had curly black hair and little round helmets, and yet again they were heavily armed with spears, shields, and arrows. "We thought you were Assyrians," he explained. "We Hittites are at war with the Assyrians." Asterix just glowered. "I ask you," said Obelix, "do we look like Assyrians? These Hittites are crazy," he added as they moved on. "This is certainly a crowded part of the desert," said Asterix. He was not at all surprised when they heard yet another plunk. They didn't wait to see the arrows landing in the sand this time. They just took cover immediately. And when a voice began to ask, "Who are?" Asterix didn't wait for it to finish. He bellowed, "Gauls!" and marched out of cover in a fury to confront the fourth band of warriors. This lot had curly black hair and curly black beards to go with their pointy helmets and their spears, shields, and arrows. I know, Asterix bawled them out. "You're a cohort of Assyrians coming down like a wolf on the fold, and you're awfully sorry. So just who did you think we were?" Medes," said the Assyrian leader, taken aback. "I ask you, do we look like Medes? These Assyrians are crazy," said Obelix as they walked away. It was quite a surprise, therefore, when they rounded the next set of dunes and met a group of rather grandly dressed men carrying swords, spears, and arrows, but not shooting anything at them. "Excuse me, gentlemen," said their leader politely. "We're Medes, lost in this desert. Could you possibly tell us the way out?" "Nothing easier," shouted Asterix, still in a furious temper. "Just follow the arrows." "You know," said Obelix as they walked on, "these Medes are—" "Don't say it," yelled Asterix, all on edge. "You're getting me down, repeating the same thing over and over again." They went on in silence for a while. Then Obelix said something different. "I'm thirsty." "Have a drink of water, then," snapped Asterix. "I can't," said Obelix. "It's run out." He held up a limp piece of damp leather. "One of those arrows pierced the water skin." Asterix was horrified. "We'll never get to Babylon without water," he said. "That means no rock oil. That means no more magic potion. Unless we find help, our mission has failed. If only we could meet someone." "You were complaining the place was crowded just now," Obelix pointed out. "Obelix, sometimes you really do get me down," said his friend. But Obelix's attention had wandered. He was watching his little dog, who was busily scratching in the sand. "What do you think Dogmatix is doing?" he said. "Looks as if he's found something." Asterix brightened up. "Maybe he's discovered a well." "Well, why not?" said Obelix. "Dogmatix can find anything. You only have to ask him." The little dog scratched a hole, disappeared down it, and went on scratching, throwing up a mound of sand behind him. Suddenly the two Gauls heard a mysterious sound. First it was a faint rushing sound. Then it was a louder whooshing sound. Then it was a deafening roar. And the next moment, with a mighty boom, a great black jet of liquid burst out of the hole Dogmatix had dug and shot high into the air, carrying the startled little dog with it. Covered with black fluid, the Gaul sat under the jet and stared. "Yuck," said Obelix. "This isn't much of a well. The water tastes horrible. It's all black." But Asterix had worked out just what Dogmatics had done. "This isn't water," he said. "It's oil. We've struck rock oil, liquid gold. It's the black gold we need." He jumped to his feet, spreading his arms wide in elation. "This is fantastic," he cried. "Now we needn't go to Babylon." "Didn't I tell you Dogmatics could find anything?" said Obelix proudly, catching his little dog as he finally came down to earth. Dogmatics, who was usually black and white, was now black all over. Asterix set to work to repair the water skin. When he was sure he'd done the job, he filled it with oil to take away with them. Then they did what they could to clean themselves up and set off back towards the coast. "Our best plan is to rejoin Economic Crisis in his ship in Tyre," said Asterix, trotting ahead of Obelix and the camel. "Then we must get back to Gaul at top speed." He was going too fast for the camel. Obelix tried to haul it along faster, and when that failed, since camels are stubborn animals, he picked it up, greatly to its surprise, put it on his back, put Dogmatics on the camel's hump, and strode along after Asterix, carrying a pair of them. "I can almost smell the roast boar already," he said happily. However, the Gauls had reckoned without the double-dealing spy 006, who was in Tyre before them. He'd come from Jerusalem and asked to see the prefect Tyrannicus, Roman governor of the city. The prefect was lounging in a handsome golden chair, eating fruit and being fanned by a slave. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he asked the lean, cadaverous stranger who stood before him with a little fly buzzing insistently round his head. "I come to you on behalf of Caesar, who has just got this message through to me," said the stranger, holding up a tiny scrap of papyrus. "You are to give orders to have all merchant vessels about to set sail for Gaul destroyed and sunk." He handed the papyrus to the prefect. "Talk about winged words," said Prefect Tyrannicus, looking at the date on the letter. "Your courier did well to get from Rome to Tyre so fast." "Yes, we use a really top-flight messenger," said the spy rather smugly, and the carrier fly buzzed around him in ecstasies of delight. Her beloved 006 was appreciating her at last. The Gaul's journey back to the sea was long and quite tiring, or anyway it was for the camel Obelix was carrying, who wasn't used to this mode of transport and felt seasick. But at last they came within sight of the great seaport. They stopped on a hill above the coast to plan their next move. "We could use Samson Alias's disguises again to help us get into Tyre unnoticed," said Asterix. "Come on, Obelix, get yourself attired. We can leave the camel here." "Thank goodness for that," thought the camel. "Being humped around by that great fat Gaul really gives me the hump." Dressed in their striped robes, Asterix and Obelix were soon walking the streets of Tyre. Asterix was carrying the water skin full of rock oil, while Obelix carried a bundle containing the rest of their belongings. Dogmatics trotted along beside them. "The place is full of Romans," said Asterix. "We must go carefully." Tyre was a large and busy city, one of the most famous seaports of the ancient world. Once the two Gauls had got beyond the harbour itself, where ships from every nation of the known world were riding at anchor, they found the place a maze full of winding streets and alleys. It was also full of Roman patrols. "How shall we ever find Economic Crisis in his warehouse?" said Asterix, baffled. "I've got a cunning idea," said Obelix, looking round. He spotted a Roman soldier standing at a street corner and strolled over to him. "Excuse me, soldier," he said, picking the man up by the front of his army tunic, lifting him a foot off the ground and shaking him ever so gently. "Where can we find Economic Crisis, please?"
"A Phoenician merchant,"
said the terrified legionary. He gabbled out the information Obelix wanted in a hurry.
"His warehouse is at the end of the port. Just go straight ahead. You can't miss it. And now, please, would you very kindly put me down?"
It was more than Obelix could do to put a Roman down without landing a mighty blow on his helmet. The legionary folded up on the ground, stunned, while the two Gauls hurried off, following his directions. "You see," said Obelix proudly. "I said please, did you notice? Good manners will get you anything." "Oh, yes. What a cunning idea that was," said Asterix, sarcastically. "A brilliantly striking idea, you might say. Did you have to hit him after he told us what we needed to know? You'll bring the whole Roman garrison a tire down on us." "Well, of course, when it's not Mr. Asterix's own idea," began Obelix huffily, but Asterix interrupted him. He'd seen a sign above a green and yellow striped awning. The sign said, "Economic crisis, import-export." They'd reached their friend's warehouse. "Here we are," said Asterix. "There they are!" yelled a voice behind him. It was a Roman voice. "After 'em!" it shouted. The two Gauls ran into the cool, spacious premises of Economic Crisis warehouse. Luckily, they found their friends seated behind a desk. They were in such a hurry that at first they didn't notice how glum the merchant looked. "Quick, Economic Crisis!" gasped Asterix. "We've completed our mission, and now we must weigh anchor and set sail for Gaul. Where's your ship?" "Ship?" said Economic Crisis darkly. "What ship? I haven't got a ship now. It's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" said Asterix. "The Romans sank my ship on Julius Caesar's orders," Economic Crisis told them. "You find me sunk in gloom. My biggest asset's been liquidated. I'm probably sunk myself." "Oh, no," groaned Asterix. "I might have known 006 had warned the Romans to stop us setting out for Gaul again." The Roman voice is getting dangerously close now. "They're in here!" it shouted. "Search this warehouse!" The Gauls looked round in alarm. Could they hide anywhere among all the jars and amphoras and rolls of costly textiles Economic Crisis had in his warehouse? "Here, follow me," said the merchant, snapping out of his dismal mood. He lit a torch and quickly led them down an underground tunnel. "When the Romans began taxing me, I built this secret tunnel," he explained. "It leads to a cellar where I hide most of my stock. That's why I'm always in a seller's market." The Gauls entered the cellar. It contained even more precious merchandise than the warehouse itself. "We're just below the main quay here," Economic Crisis told them, pointing upwards. "And ironically, that means we're right opposite Julius Caesar's flagship." Sure enough, if the Gauls could have seen through the trapdoor above their heads, they would have seen a magnificent Roman galley tied up to the quay. It had a Roman eagle as its figurehead, and a soldier stood on guard beside the lower gangplank which ran down from the ship to the paving stones of the quay side. "You mean Caesar's here himself?" asked Asterix in surprise. "No," said Economic Crisis, "but he's lent the flagship to M. Devious Surreptitious, head of MI-VI, his secret service, who has come in person to see you captured." Sure enough, in the luxurious stateroom on board Caesar's galley, those old accomplices, Surreptitious and 006, were reclining side by side, eating exotic fruit and drinking wine. The carrier fly, still deeply attached to 006, was buzzing round his head. "Caesar is getting impatient, 006, his spymaster Surreptitious reminded the secret agent. "What about that magic potion? How are things going?" Reclining on his couch, 006 was very laid back. "Oh, I only have to dispose of the two Gauls, Asterix and Obelix. That shouldn't take long. They've just been spotted locally in Hebrew disguise." Down in the warehouse cellar, Asterix was racking his brains, wondering what their next move should be. He suddenly exclaimed, "I've got an idea." Obelix snorted. "Copycat," he said. "Is your crew still around the place, Economic Crisis?" Asterix asked. "Yes," said the Phoenician, "but they're not package holiday makers anymore. They're competition winners now. All the prizes in the competition were a sea cruise exclusive of expenses, and I'm their CO. That stands for Competition Organiser." "Well, yes, but never mind the details," said Asterix. "Get 'em here. This is my plan." And he began explaining it. At nightfall, Obelix, no longer in disguise, lifted the cellar trapdoor, climbed out, and strolled along the quay. He raised a hand in friendly greeting to the legionary on guard duty beside the Roman flagship. "Halt!" bellowed the legionary, pointing his spear. "Who goes there?" "Evening, soldier," said Obelix cheerily. The Roman, who was beefy but not very bright, recognised his Gaulish accent. "You're in luck, Gaul," he said. "For a moment I thought you were in Hebrew He got no further. Obelix had knocked the man unconscious with one mighty blow before he could remember that he was supposed to be spotting Gauls whether or not they were in disguise. Asterix, in his turn, emerged from the trapdoor, followed by the Phoenician crewman, carrying goods from Economic Crisis' warehouse up the gangplank and on board Caesar's great galley. As they stowed the bales and jars of merchandise in the hold, Asterix went exploring the ship. It wasn't long before he found the 2 Roman agents in the luxurious stateroom. "Well, if it isn't an old friend of mine," he exclaimed, seeing 006. "Asterix!" cried the astonished spy. "The Gaul?" inquired Surreptitious, who of course had never set eyes on him. Asterix wasted no time in knocking the secret agents' heads together, and before they knew it they were chained up in the hold, while Caesar's ship moved out to sea with the Phoenicians at the oars. "Julius Caesar will not be pleased," moaned Surreptitious when he came round and realized what had happened. "Oh, yes, he will," chuckled 006, who had taken out his stylus and papyrus again. "Julius Caesar will be very pleased indeed to get the message I'm sending him." He tied it to the carrier-fly's back, and let her out through a grating in the deck above his head. "Off you go, my pretty, taking the vengeance of 006 with you." "His honeyed tones can always win me over," sighed the lovelorn fly, as she set out for Rome once more. A little while later, a Roman army officer approached Julius Caesar with a small, damp message. "A letter for you, O Caesar," he explained. "Not in very good condition, I'm afraid. The bearer fell in my soup." "Let's see it," said Caesar. He read what it said. "The indomitable Gauls have no magic potion left and no means of making more. There's nothing now to prevent your legions occupying all Gaul. Signed 006. Just as the spy had predicted, Caesar was indeed delighted. He immediately gave orders for his legionaries to invade and crush the Gaulish village. It should be easy-peasy this time. Meanwhile, the Gauls, in economic crisis, were enjoying a pleasant cruise home to Gaul in the captured Roman flagship. It felt just like the voyage out, only in reverse, when the lookout called down from the masthead, "Pirate ship ahoy, competition organizer!" "Customers!" said economic crisis happily. "Roman galley to starboard!" the pirate lookout called down to his captain. But the pirate captain was feeling cautious. "We'll stay neutral today," he said. "I waive this encounter. Let the Romans rule the waves." "But the galley's not wavering. She's giving chase," reported the pirate lookout. It was not long before the horrible truth dawned on the pirate captain, and not long after that he was agreeing to purchase the entire cargo economic crisis was carrying yet again. 4,000 sestertii. That's it," said economic crisis, happily counting the money. "But that's twice last time's price," protested the pirate captain. "Well, you know how it is with inflation," explained Asterix. The 2 ships moved away from each other again, one now much lighter in the water than the other. "Asterix," said economic crisis, "you have a real head for business. How would you like to go into partnership with me?" No thanks," said Asterix, thinking of the small print in the Phoenicians' contracts. "Ave aquae vale," said the first mate of the pirate ship as they sailed away. "Hail and farewell." "Never mind the classical allusions," said the pirate captain. "How am I going to sell this lot?" Now that they were approaching the shores of Gaul, Asterix allowed 006 up on deck for some fresh air, and to let him know that he'd failed. "You see this waterskin?" he said. "It's full of rock oil. We're bringing some home in spite of you, 006. This was news to the spy. Bad news, too. But he wasn't giving in yet. Perhaps he could grab the oil and hurl it overboard. Launching himself at Asterix, he snarled, "I'm not so sure of that." He had failed to notice Obelix coming up behind. Asterix saw the danger. "No, Obelix, no!" he yelled. But he was too late. Obelix had landed on top of the spy, knocking the breath out of him. The spy, in turn, landed on top of the waterskin, which burst under their combined weight. The oil inside spurted out and over the ship's rail, drenching an unfortunate seabird swimming along below, and polluting the water of the Mare Britannicum, or English Channel, for the first time in history. "Starting a few centuries early, aren't you?" squawked the indignant seabird. Obelix picked up the spy and gave him a good shaking. But Asterix was staring at the empty waterskin. "We're done for," he wailed. "There's no oil left. And after we brought it all this way." He was in gloomy mood, as he and Obelix came ashore near the Gaulish village. Obelix was carrying their prisoners. He had Surreptitious under one arm and 006 under the other. Economic Crisis waved goodbye. "I promise I won't forget to bring you some rock oil next time I visit Gaul, Asterix," he called. But that was no consolation to Asterix. For once, he and Obelix had failed in their mission. After all their brave efforts to. "The whole village will be waiting for us, on tenterhooks, in fear of the Romans, and what can I tell them?" he muttered. However, as they climbed the path up the cliff and approached the village, an entirely unexpected sight met their eyes. A full-scale battle was raging between Romans and Gauls just outside the fence. The Romans, who'd been sent to conquer the village on Caesar's orders, had met with unexpected resistance. The Gauls obviously weren't in fear of them at all. In fact, they were thumping them in the traditional way and with great enthusiasm. Roman legionaries lay stunned and bruised everywhere, and those who could still run for it had turned to flee.
"Well done, everyone!"
shouted Chief Vital Statistics.
"They're running like rabbits."
"That's a shame," said Unhygienics, bringing a massive fish down over the heads of 2 legionaries at once. "We were having fun." Asterix could hardly believe his eyes. They're fighting as well as ever," he stammered.
"Without potion."
"Without us, too," grumbled Obelix. "It's not fair." Spotting the Druid, Asterix hurried up to him. "Getafix, what is this miracle? What's going on?" he asked.
"Hello, Asterix," said the Druid. "Had a nice trip?"
Asterix bowed his head sadly. "I'm afraid I haven't brought any rock oil back, Getafix."
"Any what oil?"
asked the Druid.
"Rock oil, of course," said Asterix. "Black gold. The vital ingredient of the magic potion."
"Oh, yes, that," said Getafix calmly.
"Petroleum. Well, don't worry. I did a few experiments and found I could use beetroot juice instead. The potion works just as well with beetroot juice, and it tastes a lot nicer."
There was a thump. Asterix had keeled over with shock and gone white as a sheet. He was staring fixedly at the sky. Everyone came running up.
"Oh, you know what it is," said Fully Automatics the blacksmith. "He's had a stroke. I've seen this before. My brother-in-law had one when—"
"Want me to thump you?" offered Obelix.
"Go away," said Getafix. "I was treating for shock."
He brought out a flask of potion. Soon Asterix was sitting up, his face back to its normal colour.
"You're right," he said a little faintly. "The new magic potion does taste better. The next time you change the recipe, I wish you'd do your experiments before sending us off to the ends of the earth, Getafix."
"Hey, Asterix, what do we do with these 2? asked Obelix, indicating the prisoners tucked under his arms.
"By two tarties, I'd almost forgotten them in all the excitement," said Asterix. He thought for a moment. "Is 006's chariot still around?" he asked. "Don't mention that chariot to me," said Chief Vital Statistics grimly. "I tried pressing the buttons to see if I could make it do anything, and it turned into a travelling trunk. I was shut inside for 3 days before they managed to get me out." "A travelling trunk," said Asterix thoughtfully. "Exactly what I need."
A week or so later, 2 legionaries entered Caesar's palace with a large travelling trunk. It had an enormous bow of pink ribbon round it.
"Ave, Caesar," said the soldiers. "This gift-wrapped trunk has just been delivered for you." "Open it," said Caesar.
The soldiers undid the bow and saw a button marked "Press here to open." They pressed it. The lid of the trunk sprang open to reveal Surreptitious and 006 bound and gagged inside. There was a large greetings slab in the trunk, too. It said, "From the Gaulish village, with compliments to Caesar." And next day, the audience at the Circus Maximus had the pleasure of watching a brand-new game invented by Caesar for the entertainment of the Roman public. 2 former secret agents, smeared all over with honey, were chased round and round the arena, pursued by a great cloud of hungry flies. The beautiful carrier fly, who had been longing for the return of 006, hovered lovingly above the scene. The Roman public thought it was a very good game indeed. However, far away from such cruel and barbarous pastimes, the indomitable Gauls of the little village were enjoying healthier pleasures. They might not have any rock oil, but they'd foiled the Romans yet again, and their heroes were back, so it seemed a good time to hold a banquet. Obelix told everyone about the interesting dish of stuffed carp he'd eaten in Judea.
"We might try stuffing wild boar for a change," he suggested.
"A change?" said his neighbour at table. "But stuffing wild boar's about all you ever do, Obelix." "Come on, Asterix, tell us about your adventures," said the Druid. "Well," said Asterix, "I suppose you could say our story began in the quiet, peaceful depths of the Gaulish forest, where everything seemed to suggest that it was dinner time." Two wild boars, eavesdropping in the shadows, sighed. "They're back," said one boar. "Our holiday is over." "Better go and warn the herd," agreed the other boar. "Those Gauls! This really is the end." And for the time being, so it was.